I want to talk about the what I thought was the one of the best arcs that I've done in a D&D campaign. And it was in my original Saturday weekly game, which currently isn't running at the moment, but it's with 3 players. So it's with my wife, and it's with my friends Evie and Kari, and the arc that they were up to is basically the story up to this point that I want to talk about is they were doing some like prodding around in a city, and they discovered some shady dealings going on in the local butcher shop. It was kind of the classic cliche, oh, the butchers are up to something shady. And to cut a long story short, they discovered that the butcher and his wife had a child who was a tiefling, and they were so cut up by this that they'd essentially shut the tiefling into a basement and were treating him horribly. So they liberated him, and this kid is not your average tiefling. This tiefling was special in that the source of what made them into a tiefling from conception was the basement of the house before the butchers had even moved in, was a worshipping ground for Orcus, the god of undeath. So they were like a demonic tiefling that kind of has innate abilities over undeath. And one of the manifestations of that is whenever they go to sleep, the forces of Orcus arrive to try to reclaim him. So the party decided to take him in, and they were like, right, we're gonna take this kid, and we're gonna do everything that we can to make him safe. They discovered a myth, or not really a myth, like they'd confirmed that somebody had been there, of a demi-plane called Alandar, which is like a demi-plane where people who are displaced and maybe don't belong where they live, no matter what plane it is, can find a home. So the adventure kind of went in the direction of we're gonna find a home for this kid, and it took them to a town called Havenham. Now, in the background of all of this going on, I'd already had it firmly in my head that I wanted some retribution for a particularly evil act that Kari's character had performed right at the beginning of the campaign. So pretty much the third or fourth session ever of the campaign, they got set upon by bandits, and they murdered a few of them, and in self-defense, but they murdered a few of them. And to make an example of their leader, they Eerie, Kari's character, basically pushed him down onto his front, and in thieves' cant carved the word failure into his back, and then let him go. It was pretty gnarly, but I was like, even during that session, I was like, I want that guy to come back. And as we were moving into this arc, I decided this is it. Now is the time that this guy is going to come back. So the reason why I think this was one of the more powerful arcs, and maybe like what I would probably say is kind of the best example of my GMing in a homebrew sense, is because I took some time to think about it and do some writing about it. So yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and read this. So there are some things that didn't happen. So for example, right at the start here, I say that on the road, Nepenthe, who is Ebby's character, has a dream where Tia shows her a lizard eating a cricket, which then expands into a gigantic man made of blood, who then crushes the lizard underfoot. So that was meant to be like a prophetic vision of what was coming, which was this guy coming to get his revenge on her. And Nepenthe is a cleric of Tyr. That's why it's specifically Tyr showing her. But yeah, basically I did all of this stuff and wrote all of this background. So I explained who Borin Braxwell is. So immediately we've got an NPC that I talk about a little bit, who was a cleric of the local cathedral, who'd become dissatisfied, and like just by the very nature of like reading this stuff, or writing this stuff, I had a better example of who these NPCs were, and their motivations and things. So like why was Borin so interested in going to this place, and kind of the things that how did the things that he learned while he was there affect what happens. And essentially what happened was he was a cleric and he was devoted to his clericdom, and then he went and discovered this place Alandar. Like, he went on a pilgrimage, and the things that he learned while he was in Alandar provoked him to cast off his entire faith. So when it comes to the party coming to find him, he was basically pissing his life away in a gambling house. But again, he doesn't know the exact location. Powerful magic causes the memory of its location to quickly erode upon leaving the forest. But he does remember that on his original journey, he befriended a sprite named Caraway, who led him there once he was able to earn their trust. So then that becomes... he once hailed from Edgeland. Don't stop reading ahead. That's cheating. Yes. So, and the mystery was that when they arrived in Havenham, which was like the settlement within the Cormorant Forest that the adventure takes, the adventure like roughly takes place, is this sprite Caraway has gone missing, and that kind of leads into the deeper plot. That probably wouldn't have happened had I not written this, and you'll see why in a minute. So yeah, Caraway was a member of a tribe of sprites who are on friendly terms with both Havenham and Alandar, and often travel between the two to share information. After arriving in Havenham and making a few inquiries, Borin is troubled to discover that Caraway hasn't been heard from in several weeks. This is important because this is stuff that would have happened regardless of whether the players are there or not. Like, Borin, unless something terrible happened to Borin, like, he was always going to discover that information. So regardless of whether the characters discover it or not, Borin was always going to find out that Caraway had gone missing. So this is the stuff that the players don't know. This is Kian, who is the villain, like the main villain of this adventure. And Kian is the bandit that Kari's character fucked up. So yeah, let me explain a little bit further. Caraway hasn't been heard from in several weeks, and people are talking about the sense of an incredible malice which is growing nearby. The source of the malice is Kian, who once hated... So this is Kian's backstory. So he comes from a village called Edgeland. Pun intended. He's a very edgy boy. And he lives in a village in the hills between Slatehaven and Barovia. For anyone who doesn't know, the very first adventure that we did on this campaign was the Death House. So just randomly in the middle of my homebrew setting, Barovia is just there. The village had once prospered thanks to bountiful grain harvests, but a succession of crop failures over the years, coupled with perceived indifference of the local communities, who were each mired in their own problems, with little skills beyond farming, the younger villagers, including him, banded together to turn to brigandry in order to sustain themselves, eroding the village into a mostly lawless society. Kian and his group had seen some success plundering the road between the two towns, only to be confronted with Eerie and the others. The party murdered his group, and Eerie carved failure into his back in thieves' cant. Hands tied behind him, he had no choice but to return to Edgeland with his shame on display. He was made a laughingstock, his wife left him, and his closest friends he had known since childhood were dead. Utterly broken, Kian wandered out of the village alone. He hoped to walk until he could walk no more and die wherever he fell. He finally collapsed at the westernmost threshold of the Cormorant Forest, where he was discovered by a hag named Auntie Agnes. Well, maybe he shouldn't have attacked us. hey man, I'm not trying to make you feel bad. This is just what happened. Drawn to the storm of anguish and resentment, Kian was discovered by Auntie Agnes, a green hag who had been pushed to the far edge of the forest after her two sisters were killed by the Amber Watch and her coven broken. The coven were trying to find Alandar so they could corrupt it and make it their home. So she wants to find it and basically complete what they'd started in the hopes that she can bring them back. Kian and Agnes form a pact. In exchange for helping her rebuild her coven and discover the location of Alandar, Agnes promises to guide him and help him grow in strength so that he can take revenge on those who have wronged him. As a gesture of goodwill, she gives him her hag eye, which is the only vestige of the coven left. So a hag eye is essentially like a lacquered eyeball, and the hags can essentially see through it. The coven can see through the eye. So it basically meant that Agnes could see whatever Kian saw. I think they found it. I can't remember if they found it on his corpse. I think they might have done. And then they didn't know what it was. They were just like, ugh. Blah blah blah. In reality, here we go. Yeah, but her drive really was to encourage and frustrate the malice within him until he essentially becomes nothing more than an obedient killing machine. Like, she has no desire in actually helping him. She just wants to kind of fuel this tragic fire within him until he's just a maniac, essentially, which she was pretty successful in, especially because after cultivating the bloodlust in him, she shares with him the secret of how to create redcaps, which, for anyone who doesn't know, redcaps are like gnome-ish fey creatures that are basically violence incarnate. They appear when blood is spilled, and I think when the moon is shone on freshly spilled blood, they rise up out of the blood, and they're like, we're gonna kill more people because it's fun. They wear these great big clompy boots, and they're all about being loud, and they're all about just doing a shitload of damage. So she teaches him how to create redcaps, who feel an uncanny kinship with him because he's so like, and as a result, they follow his orders. Kian and the redcaps often attack people who dare to venture out of Havenham, creating tales of people vanishing after the thunder, which is the sound of the redcaps' footsteps, which I've written there. So immediately, like, just having that background gave me some things that I could sprinkle in at the very start. I could be like, we could talk about the thunder, we can talk about people going missing, we can talk about the fact that Caraway has gone missing. There were so many like seeds there that the players could investigate, which I maybe wouldn't have had I not written this. Because I think what I was trying to do here was try and figure out what Kian's motions were going to be. And because I had the whole setup for this came from one scene in my head, and it was a scene of I had this idea of like the players would turn down an alleyway. There'd be like a crowd of people, and they would turn down an alleyway, and they would walk down, and it would be raining. It'd be kind of like the intro scene to like a detective novel or something, or like a detective show, and it would be raining, and the back wall would be illuminated by some means. And there would be a dead body on the floor, and written in blood on the wall would be the word failure written in Thieves' Cant. Because I was like, that would be such a poetic way to reintroduce this character. If the way that they find out that this person is the same guy is through this and not any other way. The fact that specifically that phraseology, I thought was very powerful. And while it didn't work out exactly that way, because essentially what I did, as you can see here, Kian will watch the party during the first quest, and unable to contain himself, he'll murder an NPC inside the village after the second, writing in Thieves' Cant on the wall in blood to make it abundantly clear who was responsible. And this is probably the first moment where I really kind of felt myself be a bit like malicious as a DM. Because I was like, Kian is driven entirely by vengeance. So he is going to want to do as much damage as possible. So what is he going to do? He is going to target an NPC that the players like. And so he went for the shopkeeper because, you know, she was a bit quirky and they felt a little bit sorry for her because they learned some of her backstory. So he was like, I'm going to kill her. So he did. And that's where they found out that the all this came out. So the scene was very similar, but it was inside a shop. Her body was behind the counter, and it was kind of written on the wall behind the counter and stuff. But it was just as dramatic, and it was super cool. Like the response to that was definitely one of my favorite moments in all of my experience. So then it kind of goes off a bit on a bit of a tangent here, kind of talking about like follow-up quests and things like that. I think this was because I just read Dragon of Icespire Peak, and I kind of like the idea of having quests and then leading that up into follow-ups and stuff. So this is when another sprite turns up that is basically like, hey, my friend has gone missing, I need to try and find him. And this is kind of what led us on into the final sequence.